What happened was...
Hey friends, it's so nice to see you. It's today, the time is now. You are here and the weather is outside your window.
Today's guest is a composer of art song, opera, and musical theater, and is considered to be one of the best of his generation. Please welcome my friend, Evan Mack.
Well, hello.
Hey, how are you?
How's it going?
Great.
Will you tell us where we are today?
We are at the Arthur Zankel Music Center in Saratoga Springs, New York at Skidmore College.
And you work here.
I work here. I'm a senior teaching professor, and I'm also a composer.
Amazing. Which is why I wanted to bring you on to talk about the development of a new show, because we're here, of course, workshopping your new musical comedy, Yeltsin in Texas.
Yes.
And I'm playing Boris Yeltsin.
Yes, hilariously.
Thank you. But, you know, I think we've both been a part of the development process of operas and musicals many times, and it's something that not a lot of people get to see behind the scenes, and not a lot of people understand the length of time it takes to develop a new show. It can take anywhere from months to many, many years.
Correct.
There are Broadway shows that have taken 20 years to develop, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you start? I know sometimes you have a commission, sometimes you think up a show and you just want to create it, but what is the first step of writing a new show?
Right, that's a great question. This piece actually started with an idea of a one-act, 60-minute opera. And it was ultimately commissioned through a consortium, and we had the idea something Texas-related. That was sort of the parameters for it. And we came up with this comedy. It was always sort of secretly a musical, and so when the opportunity came to turn it into a musical, we jumped on the chance, and so now it's a 90-minute, no intermission musical with more of a book instead of a libretto. What was interesting was we knew Joshua McGuire and I, who's my librettist, wanted to write something comedic. We had written a few serious operas and family-friendly operas, and we're like, we want to write something comedic. So that was the basis for all of it. What's interesting in this process has been workshopping the opera versus workshopping the musical.
Right. Very different.
Completely different process, and both equally valid, but with the opera, I can only say is that what's wonderful with opera singers is that they want to get every single note I wrote on the page perfect.
Right.
And then we can talk about it, and then they go, okay, go back and rewrite everything, and then we'll come back and do that.
Right.
In the musical theater, I think they should say this line. No, he would say it this way. Can I do this? Can I? And so that the music and the words and the script and lyrics are sort of, I look at it as like bumpers on the bowling alley, and then we can kind of figure out where to throw the ball.
Right. Yeah. And it's the story that we're targeting.
Correct.
In a musical.
Right.
Whereas...
Yes. And then we run into things where, as a composer, I have to say, that's great, you added all of this wonderful dialogue, but we're in a one-measure vamp. So let's figure out how to do all of this while we keep the energy of the song.
Right.
Right. So it frees us up in the greater storytelling of everything, and also because you're not bogged down by, say, full recitative, versus if you can bore deep really fast in the spoken text. Right. And so how do you do that optimally, efficiently, especially in a comedy, right? Because you want everything to kind of propel forward.
Right. And comedy, I think, is one of the most difficult things to write and perform.
Absolutely. Right. Because you have to find that you always have to be earnest in what you're doing, and making sure the characters believe everything they're saying.
Right.
Right. So that's the first thing. And then the second is not always to be ham-handed and like, oh, here's a joke, wink, here's a joke, ba-doom, those things in the music, which is very tempting, but I shouldn't choreograph that. It'll be funnier.
Right. Yeah. And it's funny because of how serious the characters take it within the story.
Correct.
And that's what makes it funny to the audience.
Absolutely. And really, we learned throughout both processes with the opera and the musical that a joke will not land if it doesn't have the gravitational pull of truth or a character's positionality. Right? If you're just saying a joke for a joke, it doesn't land. But if it's like there's a reason why they're doing this funny, it not only lands, but then it gives more heart to the show. Right. So it's like funny, heart, funny, fun. And then you root for everybody, you're feeling more. And so when you do that little bit of a turn at the end, it actually gets you because you've been in love with them the whole time.
Absolutely. Right. Yeah. And because all comedy is very serious storytelling, serious characters that are just happen to be in comedic circumstances. Right. But that's the outside looking in.
Like I love when you come in, for example, if people know Boris Yeltsin, the famous he's the first president of Free Russia, but also a very notoriously drunk guy. And so when you have these serious political moments, and then to me, I love watching you doing these subtle things of letting your guard down as Yeltsin, like, oh, I like this thing, and it becomes more infectious. So even if you didn't know who Boris Yeltsin was, we want to explain in the show, but then when you come out there and do these things, boy, do we believe you as him, and then you like him more, and you go, why are we telling the story? It's like, oh, this is why, and it really lands.
Well, and of course, this is a true story in a lot of ways. So Boris Yeltsin went to a grocery store in Texas and saw how much there was, thousands of things on the shelves, and he was deeply affected. And I was reading he was riding a plane to, I think, Miami, to his next stop, and he was just despondent, thinking about how much Americans have and Russians didn't, and they were waiting in line for food, and Americans can just go into a grocery store and there's thousands of things to choose from.
He didn't believe, first he thought it was a setup.
Yeah, like American propaganda.
Exactly.
Right?
And then he asked, and true, and we have it in the show, he asked the clerk how many degrees.
Right.
They have to manage all these things.
Right.
You know, he couldn't understand it.
Right.
And it was an unscheduled stop.
Right.
That was not on the schedule. He just said, oh, I hear things, let me pull off. And so the store wasn't even really ready. They got I think a 5-minute heads up.
Wow.
And it essentially changed the course of the world, because 2 months after his visit, the Berlin Wall falls. And then the Soviet Union wants to make a hard line pull a year and a half later with the tanks rolling into Moscow. And he was on the tanks shouting, free markets, free markets, free markets. So, you know, I mean, we believe that the Jell-O pudding pops changed the world.
Right.
It was the abundance in the American bounty.
Right. And this grocery store that he visited is kind of a historic landmark, and people go to see it.
Yes, it has this cool cultish following. It was a Randall's, and now it's a Food Lion, and there are, you know, people will come and take photos where he is. And what's interesting, because it wasn't a revamped store, it looks a lot. It has an 80s vibe of a grocery store with the tiling and everything else. And so people go to that same frozen food section, and the radishes that were size of potatoes, and he could not understand all the colors. I mean, think about the colors. It's like your shirt, like the colors of the produce aisle.
Sure.
Versus you had bread lines.
Right.
Or nothing in the
it's just like bread and potatoes.
Exactly.
And
that was it.
yeah,
Right.
and waiting forever and not having enough food.
Right. And realizing that, oh, this system that he grew up in is failing.
Right.
And so what is it about the system now that we have to contend with, you know, and that's some of the things we ask in the show, which gives a deeper meaning from the true event to looking what's happening today.
Right, of course. Well, I'm sure as a creator of new works, you have several projects going on at once, at least in your head, probably on your desk.
Yeah, very true.
So how do you find when you're working on multiple projects at once, do they kind of become your children and they call to you at different times?
Absolutely, it's a great way to put it. And also that they're, even with big projects, everyone has this myth that, at least in my experience, you know, they go, oh, is that sacred? Is that? And I go, no, this is like my 5th or 6th kid. Like, let him or her play in the dirt, you know, that kind of thing. So, but yeah, there are times, what's nice is, I think training like a musician, you know, I'm a pianist as well. And so you're always thinking of short, mid, and long-term planning. Like, oh, I have a recital done thing. Oh, I have this, I have to learn this. Oh, this little section. And that goes with commissions and pieces I want to write, because it's like, well, this one's due and so I can touch on this, I can sketch this. Oh, this one needs an orchestration or an edit or a paradigm. So you're kind of doing all of those things. And I got in a very good habit early on to keep mornings generally wide open. Like, this is when I sit down.
It's your writing time.
Yeah, and sometimes you're just hanging out and kind of figuring things. But that way I'm never chasing it. It just it's there.
Yeah, no, that's that dedication. That reminds me of Ernest Hemingway. He'd sharpen a certain number of pencils, and when the pencils had each run out, that was the end of his day.
Oh, that's fantastic.
You know, and that's how he budgeted
I love
his time.
I think that's absolutely.
Yeah, or Philip Glass, you know, puts 3 hours at the piano every day.
Right,
you know?
right.
Yeah.
And I have things where I have it's funny actually, a little secret. I have a sketchbook. Like, so when you talk about these projects, actually one of the first things I'll do is type a notebook with a certain color and a certain vibe, you know. So we're doing one, I have a children's opera coming out in about a year, and it has a sort of multicolored, very whimsical, of a child, like, where all of the Yeltsin stuff is like proletariat green, and like I wanted that old 70s, 80s thing to that vibe, you know. So cool. I kind of color coordinate my projects that way.
That's really cool. I love that. Well, we have to get back to rehearsal, but can I ask you a couple quick questions?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. Zodiac sign.
Gemini.
Favorite flavor of ice cream?
Peanut butter. Pandemonium. Peanut butter pandemonium.
Okay.
Yes.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Beach or mountains?
Mountains.
Dream vacation spot?
Italy, a villa in Italy somewhere.
Fabulous. Okay, a couple serious ones.
Yes.
You can go back in time to any moment in your life and tell your younger self in that moment one thing. What is it?
Oh wow, that's a great one. I would say to my younger self that be more sure of yourself often. A lot of times I would come to that realization, but it took longer than I should. And if I just went back and be like, you got this, you're fine.
Yeah. It's hard as an artist.
Very.
Yeah. And the lifelong journey.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, the final question is, what is the meaning of life?
Wow. That's a great one. Okay. I will say the meaning of life is love.
I love it. Cool. Well, thanks for coming on.
Thank you. This is great.
Yeah.
We're having a blast.
We are.
That's all for today's episode. Puppies and rainbows till we meet again.